Good morning, viewers, and welcome back to the Tobago Updates morning show, coming to you here live from the Port Mall in Scarborough, Tobago. We're just at about 7:11 a.m. this morning. And in this segment, we have the pleasure of having on set with us Dr. Maria Dillon-Remy. And this morning, we're speaking the Procurement Bill Explained. And she's an independent senator within the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, our very own daughter of the soil. Good morning to you and welcome, Dr. Remy.
Good morning, Julian. It's good to be here. Morning to the viewing and listening public.
All right. So as we get the conversation started this morning, we would have heard of the procurement legislation for some time in Trinidad and Tobago, and it almost seems as though it came into being in an immediate manner. And then we heard, oh my gosh, we have challenges related to it, and then there's the need for amending it in some way, form, or fashion. So I want you to start by just giving us an overview of the new procurement legislation.
Okay, so I must say that it is what was debated at the end of July is now an act. So it is in force. That's one. Two, the original legislation was passed in 2015, but only partially proclaimed. And when this government came in to office, they made 3 amendments. The one that I was involved in was the one in 2020, and there was much, I would say, confusion around it. And that bill, when it was passed in December of 2020, that brought into the act some specific exemptions. But important to that discussion was that one of the things that the Minister of Finance agreed to change was that any changes would be brought back to Parliament for affirmative resolution of the Parliament. And one of the things that this bill of 2023 was doing was putting it back to negative resolution. So that was one of the big things for the independent senators. So the act was now made law in April of this year. After that 2020 amendment, 2 years plus passed, and in April this year, the government proclaimed the act. And now, in July, we are proclaimed in April. In July, we are hearing that there are so many problems with the act, and people cannot, and they want to amend it again. But I won't go there yet. One of I would say, in terms of this particular act of 2023, one of the main clauses in it was that it sought to validate 2 legal notices that were issued by the Minister of Finance, one at the end of May 21, that's legal notice 164, yes, and the other legal notice 206 of July 2023. Legal notice of 164 dealt with some things that wanted changes they wanted by the judiciary, and that was passed. And then legal notice, which is the one that really came to the fore because it was brought to light by the opposition, was the legal notice of July 206, legal notice 206, which exempted the procurement processes for the CARICOM heads of government meeting and the 50th anniversary celebration of CARICOM. Those were exempted from the process that was agreed to by the act. So it was brought to the public's attention, and that was one of the clauses that needed to be resolute. The problem there was, why didn't the government bring it for affirmative resolution, which is what, when the debate happened in December of 2020, as I said, one of the major parts of the debate was that the government should bring back any changes that they want. And that was put as an amendment by the independent senators in the 2020 debate. And the government agreed. Having done that now, there are 2 legal notices that you've put into where you've made amendments, you've made changes, you put exemptions in, but you did not bring it back to Parliament. And the reason for that was that there was an error in the act. And because of that error, which required that services exempted under Section 7 of the Act, it said Section 7(5) of the Act. And Section 7.5 of the Act, there was an error there because Section 7.5 of the Act does not deal with exemptions. So the law said any changes made under Section 7.5 should be brought to affirmative resolution. But that was an error. And therefore, the government went ahead and did the legal notices that allowed them to procure for CARICOM and procure for the judiciary without having to come back for affirmative resolution. But now they were bringing back to change so that instead of Section 7.5 of the Act, that was another clause of the Act that said it was being changed now to Section 7.6e, which was the one that dealt with exemptions. So that was another reason for bringing the changes, this amendment to the Parliament.
So from where we sit as the general public, and I'm glad that you mentioned it, because even the general focus of the public seemed to have been on the recent CARICOM celebrations held, and the feeling that ultimately, while the population may have been crying out and concerned about the fact that, all right, this legislation has now been passed, it seems quite onerous, a lot to do, a lot to get done, and people were complaining, are there other ways, or how can we get around it? Nothing was done at that moment until it became an issue for the government themselves. Yes. Is that in itself not an indication that there might have been some kind of rush to have this thing passed immediately without going through the requisite work? Because you're saying this has been on the table for some time.
Yes.
But whether or not the requisite work that should have gone into it so as to avoid the extent of what would have transpired in this instance, or is it common in legislation that you bounce upon something that affects you significantly like this and you seek to get an exemption?
I can't comment on that,
okay.
that part. But I would say, I would have thought that the government, having proclaimed the act, would have made sure that everything that was necessary would have been in there for things to work. One of the things that the minister said was that there were complaints from within the ministries, the permanent secretaries within the ministries were saying that they could not work. In other words, it was going to bring, the phrase that was used was going to grind the processes of government to a halt because the time that would have been taken to procure, etc. Many of the independent senators did not buy that because these people had time to prepare. And what was happening was that many of the persons that they did business with before were not registered on the registry for the procurement regulator. There's a registry there that you had to register on. And in order to register, you had to have things in place like the income tax, etc., VAT clearance, the things that you had to legally have. Apparently, many of them did not have it. And as a result, they were not registered. And therefore, they were not legally able to tender for stuff with the government. And that was one of the things that was brought up. The answer to that would have been, I would have said, and I did say that, why didn't you just give more time to the people? Instead of the procurement the legislation was assented to, was proclaimed in August, in April. You could have probably given people time, let's say, over the next year. Some people said 6 months. Give them time to get the register and make sure that you get your thing. But they said no. They wanted a change, and the change that they were going to make there, that was presented, and that is still a fact, is that any procurement that happens within under $1 million, which was the level of what the PSAs and in Tobago the chief administrator can sign off on, those things would not go through the act as it stood there. Again, we were concerned. $1 million may not sound like a lot in things, but $1 million multiplied by, if you look at what the Tobago House of Assembly has to spend, all you need to do, let's say 300 million, all you need to do is 300 contracts under $1 million. I'm saying it didn't sit well. That was changed because so one of the things that the minister was saying was that you could go back now to what used to happen before, where instead of going through the legislation with the people having to be registered, etc., the permanent secretaries could have used whatever systems they had before to approve of these people to be so that they can tender. we were saying you are putting things to a higher standard. Why go back to where you were before? You changed from that to something that was different. So anyhow, in the end, there were amendments that were made. So the act right now, um, so let me learn right. I said the second thing that was the changing of the affirmative back to negative resolution. The third thing was that the procurement of goods under a million, and then there was another part that talked about the minister could, by order, either on his own accord or in consultation with the office, that's the office of the procurement regulator, they could bring regulations about further exemptions. And that did not go down well at all. That, I think, was one of the major things that the government agreed to. The minister, the current act says that any changes to the regulations has to go through the procurement regulator. And in other words, including those under a million. So in other words, you don't just have the minister did say that he would have had to put regulations in, but he could have put in regulations that let's say the Minister of Finance could have put in regulations without necessarily having the approval or the agreement of the procurement regulator. Now, anything that the procurement that happens under $1 million, the regulator has to approve of those regulations. In other words, whatever is done now by the permanent secretaries and within the government system, the procurement regulator will have an oversight of that. Now, what is happening here is that they also said that any procurement that happens must come back to the parliament. In other words, they must know what was done. You must let the parliament know what was agreed to, what changes happened within that $1 million. And that is why I think four of the independent senators voted for it, because of those changes that happened.
All right. Just before we go further, viewers, we head on out to a quick break, and we want to remind you that this is your opportunity to share the live, share the live, share the live. We'll be right back to continue the conversation. Good morning. Good morning, viewers, and welcome back to the Tobago Updates morning show, coming to you here live from the Port Mall in Scarborough, Tobago. As we continue the conversation this morning, we are speaking, for those of you now joining us, we are speaking with Dr. Maria Dillon-Remy, independent senator in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And we're speaking about the procurement bill and the changes that would have taken place recently. Just before we went out to the break, Dr. Remy, we were speaking about the fact that the voting of some independent senators seemed to have leaned in favor of the changes versus others who probably stood firmly against.
Okay.
What I want to get is, one, I would like you to touch on that. What does that mean in terms of seeing that kind of variation at the level of the independent bench? And two, beginning to look at, for the average person or small business entities, do we see this legislation working for them, or creating a scenario where only the big players who can keep up will benefit? What are your thoughts?
Interesting. So let's talk about the vote. There's no independent bench.
Right.
They're independent senators, 9 independent senators. So really and truly, it's probably 9 benches, because each independent senator votes according to what they see and how they think they should vote. In this case, 4 independent senators voted with the government, 2 voted against, and 1, 2, 6, and 3 voted, 3 abstained. Right. Now, the ones who would have voted for, Julien, it is the first time that, since I'm there, it's almost 5 years now, every independent senator spoke on that bill. I mean, 12 midnight, people were coming on and speaking on the bill because people were so concerned about what was happening. It was the first time I experienced that. Most times, you can have probably up to 7, but most people would not speak. Every independent senator spoke. And people were concerned about what was happening. And in the end, I think the ones who would have voted for, and that included me, I thought that there were significant adjustments and changes, amendments that were agreed to by the government. And hence, I gave the support that I did. in 2020, I gave my support because they had moved the changes from negative to affirmative resolution. And I was concerned, how are you bringing this back now to negative again? After we agreed to, and you did not do that, you didn't bring it back to the parliament, but yet you're coming back now. But what is happening now is that when the only way, it's still negative resolution, what has been put there now, but it must be with the agreement of an independent person, that's the procurement regulator's
Right.
office. So it wouldn't be the minister agreeing to something and having it activated without the procurement regulators, not just information or knowledge, but agreement. So some of us thought that there were sufficient amendments, and 4 people voted. Some people still were not convinced, and therefore they abstained. And then others didn't agree with some of the things that were there, and therefore they voted against. And we have that, I would say, a privilege, because we don't have to vote in any way that you vote. At the end of the day, you should be able to defend why you voted the way you did. And it is hoped that you would have done it with the kind of integrity that is expected of us, not just voting with the crowd, but voting, and you can say why you voted the way you. So that is that's the as to how the independent
The vote would have
senators,
gone.
how the vote would have gone. Yes, the government got 4 independent senators voting for with them.
Do you see this act now working in terms of promoting, a small business in particular? Because the small businessmen seem to have concerns with the fact that, this may not be really geared to cover me or to give me a real opportunity.
And which is what I think the government was also saying. Now, Julian, we are talking about spending of government funds. And a part of the problem that was occurring before, and I'll talk about what I think about what will happen in the future. What a part of the problem was people was concerned that the quality of the procurement process had a lot to be desired, and therefore the need for change. And I think not just the then government who would have brought it would have been the People's Partnership, but there were lots of NGOs that were pushing for transparency. So the principles of that act, it says, the Act of 2015 says, an act to provide for public procurement and for retention and disposal of property in accordance with principles of good governance, namely accountability, transparency, integrity, and value for money. You would want to know that if government money is spending, even though it's not coming out of your pocket, but it's government money, and therefore it should be spent with those principles. And that is what I think should be in the fore of people's thinking. And the small man should also know that whatever it is whatever he or she is procuring for, should be done with those principles. So they must be registered. We don't know as yet, by the way, what the regulations are going to be for this, what the changes are going to be, because there may be changes, but those changes will be brought to the parliament. And they will be, at least the parliament will have oversight of it. So I would say to the small man, make sure that the things that you are doing is above board in the first place, that the quality of the work that you give to the government must be good. We know what happened in Tobago with the last election, where people were talking about the processes that were not followed and procurement that didn't happen in the way that it should have. And yet you have the current administration, people are saying the same things about them. Julian, we are concerned as citizens that whatever is done, and this Procurement Act should do exactly that. Make sure that people who are spending government money spends it with the, in other words, that if it was your money coming out of your pocket, you would want to know that you have value for money. You will want to know that it is done in the right manner. And that is what we are saying. And that is what the small man should say. We do not know what the changes are going to be for the under $1 million, because let me just read what the act says. The act that was assented to, let me just read what it says. It says, okay, Julian, I have it right. It says, Clause 5 of the Section 5 of the Act says a new section, so Section 4 of the Act says the Act is amended by inserting the following section, subject to regulations made under Section 63, and these regulations now, as I said, are the regulations will come under the ambit, in other words, the site of the Procurement Office, right? And not just under the site of the minister. The procurement of goods and services up to 1 million are exempt from procurement requirements on this act. So it is still that there are changes to what happened before. But it also says, Section 5 says that the procedures for the procurement of goods and services up to 1 million must be subject to that process. So we will see the regulations that will come to, but there will be some changes to what is happening for procurement under 1 million. So I would recommend that all small and medium-sized business get their act together, and that's one of the things we're saying. People make money, they don't pay taxes, all that kind of thing. These are things that should be done, and these are some of the things that the procurement legislation now asks for.
We'll speak to. And just before we close, in the final part, I can't have you on, independent senator, and not speak about the Tobago Bill that, as many have described, appear to be on pause in the Parliament. Are you hopeful that it will come back again into focus in this new upcoming term of the Parliament?
All right. One, I'm a bit concerned that it's coming the year before an election because, as you realize, elections for 2025 has already started. Local government election is going on in Trinidad right now, and people are already talking about things that would concern not just a local government but general election. So I am concerned that it's going to come in that year, but I am hoping that the government does indeed put it over. But I think the main responsibility is for the people of Tobago. Do we want do we want to continue what we are doing here right now? And I would say no. So I'm hoping that the people of Tobago, and that includes the current Assembly legislature, but not them alone, they must be asking for the bill to be brought back. And I am sorry, I have said it before, it only seems to happen around the time of an election or at the time of a speech. But what happens in between is what I'm concerned about. We would like to see the people in Tobago say to the government, i.e., and as I said before, and I'm saying it again, this bill cannot be passed without opposition and in the Senate, independent senator support. So we need the people to be aware and to push for it. Will it happen in 2024, Julien? I'm a praying person, and I know that God is on our side, and I'm really praying that we don't accept status quo. The status quo is not good enough for us.
All right. Thank you very much there, Dr. Maria Dillon-Remy, independent senator in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, joining us here on set this morning. Viewers, we want to remind you that this is your opportunity to share the live, share the live, share the live.